It's Sway in the morning, only
on Shea 45.
Sway in the morning. John Forte is here. You know, formerly you know him through the Fugees, and he went solo as well. 25 minutes past the top of the hour. You know, you've had a really, your life story is, you know, took a turn to something scary in a sense when you were caught with liquid cocaine, 14 grams. Kilograms. I'm sorry, man. I don't know the weights and measurements correctly. Man, that's not a bad thing, right?
No, that's definitely not a bad thing.
Okay, all right.
Sometimes it's good to be a little bit distant from that world.
From that world. The day you got caught, did you know it was going to happen?
You know, I think that in my gut I knew it was going to happen, and that's a great question because when I was down, I remember being on the yard with my dudes, and we were kind of sitting around, and the weather was just getting nice, and we were sitting on the bleachers, and the conversation, that very question came up, and one by one, each of us admitted to hearing or feeling something in our gut the day that we were arrested. Mm-hmm. So whether you call it God, whether you call it your intuition, whether you call it your gut or your hunch, like we all heard that inner voice, and all of us refused to listen to that. And I made myself a promise. I said, I'm going to trust my gut from here on out, no matter what. Mm-hmm. And I've been living. Not necessarily solely by that, but if I get a bad feeling, if I get a bad vibration, I'm moving around.
You're moving around it, right? Yeah. If you don't mind, when you were locked up, did people knew who you were from your music career?
Yeah, people knew who I was, and interestingly enough, people followed the case, because it was written up in various magazines, Source, XXL, whole 9 yards. So the day that I actually walked in, the day that I was convicted, dudes knew that I was coming in because it was I blew trial in Texas, and every day, there was somebody from the Houston Chronicle. I'm not even sure if that was the name of the paper, but inmates were reading the newspaper, and I showed up, and basically dudes were expecting me. It's like, hey, we've been expecting you, Mr. Forte.
Now, so I knew you as John Forte from the Fugees, writer, Grammy nominated, writer, rapper, singer, producer. Did you always have a double life, or did you come upon hard times? I mean,
I came upon immense hard times. It was after my first solo album came out, Poli Sci, and even though it came out to critical acclaim, it came out to commercial disappointment. We sold about 100,000 copies of that album. Mm-hmm. By today's standard, that'd be great. Yeah. But back then it was a brick. It was however many 20, 22, 25 million with Fugees and 8 million with Clef, and then I come out and I only do 100,000 copies, and I was young. I nominated for a Grammy at 21. I felt entitled. I felt like I was on top of the world, and that in fact the world owed me. And that arrogance and that hubris is a really, really lethal cocktail for disaster. So I went up to the label and I blamed everybody. I said, "You guys are incompetent. You don't know what you're doing. Your marketing team sucks." And I was just an arrogant little punk. And then when my label dropped me, I was like, "All right, fine. I'm gonna go out there and do it on my own." Problem was I didn't have any more money. I spent all my money. I'm sitting there like, I don't know what I'm gonna do, but I want to do it on my own and then prove to the rest of the industry that I can do it. And as fate would have it, I ended up connecting with this dude, and he's like, "Hey, I know you're working on your music. I got an opportunity for you." And the opportunity was basically for me to be a middleman. It was to find him couriers to move whatever he needed moved, whether it was drugs or whether it was money. And I did that with willful blindness, saying I'll involve myself just enough to reap the benefits, but not enough that if the house of cards falls, I'll be held fully accountable. Although that defense did not go over too well when
you were in court.
When I was in court, because that defense, there is a legal term for that defense. It's called willful blindness. And on the very first day, the judge said, and he turned to the jury after opening arguments, and he said, "And ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I'd just like for you to know that willful blindness is not a valid defense." I turned to my attorney. I said, "What does that mean?" He said, "Our defense was willful blindness, and we have to find a new defense."
Wow. So you can't play dumb, basically.
Exactly. Yeah. You can't say, "Well, somebody's doing something in this house, and I know they live here, but I'm benefiting from it, but I can't really be held accountable for." You can't play dumb.
You can't do it. liquid cocaine. You got caught with 14 kilograms of liquid cocaine. Was it in a briefcase? Was it in a bag?
So it was in a suitcase.
In a suitcase, and was it in bottles, or what is a liquid coke? Does it look like water, like a bottle of water? What does it look like?
I can't say that I ever had my hands on it, and that's another interesting thing. There are two types of possession, and I hope that all the listeners out there listening to this, you have actual possession, which means that you physically hold this, and then you have constructive possession. My possession was constructive because I was guiding the couriers back to New York, even though I was never supposed to meet them. But by this time, they had already been caught. So they were doing a controlled delivery. They were never supposed to come to me. But, the feds needed a person, and they needed conversations. So, the couriers called me and said, we need you to come and get us. And I said, but that wasn't a part of the arrangement at all. So when I went to go get them, literally, they're standing at the curb at the airport, and I'm picking them up, and I put one bag into the car, and I put another bag into the car, and at that point, it was like everybody from CSI to the FBI to the DEA to the ATF to local law enforcement jumped out, and my world froze. And that was like that moment of truth. So back to constructive possession. You can possess something without ever having your hands on it if you have an expectation of interest in that in whatever is being delivered.
So if you could profit from it,
right? Yeah. And so if anybody out there is making a phone call, calling your man saying, yo, why don't you meet me at so and so, before it ever gets to you, if you have an expectation of interest in there, then you can be charged with possession. I'm just putting that out there.
It's Sway in the morning, only
on Shade 45.